I woke up in the garage on an old couch. In the dark, I could barely make out the sensors attached to the body. Mom came up to me out of the gloom, looking crazy. Mom handed me a couple of glowing pills, and I reluctantly popped them into my mouth. My dad was sitting nearby, looking at the monitor that showed my stats. He quietly told Mom that the morning test was a success. I was happy and hopefully asked if I could take a walk in the yard before the next procedure. But my parents frowned viciously. No way. The air is full of sorts of infection. With my health, I cannot leave the house. We won't let you repeat your sister's fate, Mom muttered suddenly. I jumped, startled. What sister? I was the only child. I demanded an explanation from my parents, but they were too busy with their calculations. It seemed that this was more important to them than I was. These devices had surrounded me for as long as I could remember. The fact was that my parents were scientists, and since childhood, they considered me vulnerable to any virus. But I didn't understand why. I felt great. I never even had a cold. But my ancestors still constantly examined me in their laboratory in the garage. They wouldn't even let me go to school, so I wouldn't get infected with something. I was terribly offended. While I was sitting at home, all my life passed by. I wanted to get out of this cage at last, to hang out and walk with my friends like all teenagers. But I believed my parents. They were scientists. Mom's voice brought me back to reality. She said I could go to my room. Well, finally. I quickly ran out of the garage and into the hall of the house and ran to my room. Everything in the house was built to keep me out of the street. And my room was like a hospital room. Everything was sterile, and the only furniture was an iron bed, a table, and a chair. It didn't look like a teenage girl's room at all. My parents wouldn't even let me open the windows and boarded up to the fire escape to the room in the corner of the ceiling. They literally walled me up. The only entertainment was looking out of the window. Today, the sun was shining brightly, and I wanted to go out into the yard. But then I saw a girl on the street. She looked like she was my age. She ran briskly out of the next house with a ball. I hadn't seen her here before. Suddenly, the girl noticed me at the window and waved in greeting. Overcoming my fear, I risked opening the window a little. If only my parents wouldn't notice me. It turned out that her name was Judy, and she had come here to stay with her uncle for the holidays. She offered to play basketball in her yard, but I refused. I couldn't leave the house. Judy wondered why. I complained to her that my folks wouldn't let me go anywhere. In their opinion, I had poor health. But Judy said it sounded like paranoia, and she asked if the doctors were telling me the same thing. I tried to remember, and suddenly realized that I had never been to a hospital. All my life, my health was checked only by my parents. Judy said her uncle was the head doctor at the clinic, and she could get me a free checkup, and then I could know for sure whether I was healthy or not. I agreed, of course. It may be uneasy to doubt my parents' words, but they could be wrong too. Otherwise, why did I feel good? Judy insisted on going to the hospital first thing in the morning, but I knew my parents wouldn't let me go into town. The only option was to escape. I hadn't left the house in years and I was scared, but I thought of Judy and decided that this was my chance to be free. So the next day, I was going to run. I waited until my parents had gone to their lab in the garage, then climbed out of the window and out into the street. Overcoming my terror, I began to carefully descend the drain pipe. I was almost at the ground, but then my sleeve caught on a nail on the wall. I fell down right next to the garage. Heck, what if my parents heard? But all was quiet. Brushing myself off quickly, I ran to the bus stop. With every step, I took the air seemed to get dirtier, and I put my hands over my nose. Oh, why did I start all this? But then Judy appeared in front of me, waving happily. Judy complimented me on my courage and told me that the bus was waiting for us. A couple of minutes later, we were on our way to the hospital. I couldn't believe it. The views outside the window were amazing. I only went to the city as a child, and how great it was outside of my room. Half an hour later, we were at the clinic and Judy introduced me to her uncle. Mr. Brown immediately gave me a full medical examination. It was so different from my parents' tests. They took all sorts of tests and even did an x-ray at the clinic. At the end of the day, Judy's uncle finally called me into his office. My stomach twisted with fear. What if I found out that my parents were right and I was sick? Did that mean I would never leave the house again? But Dr. Brown said it was the first time he had ever seen such a healthy person. Were the parents mistaken? Confused, I picked up the information from the desk and went out into the hallway, where Judy was waiting for me. When she heard about the results, she was thrilled. Now I could definitely live a normal life. We drove back home, but I had a bad feeling about it. When I said goodbye to Judy at the bus stop, I realized that I was already late. My parents would be out of the lab for dinner, and they'd be mad if they didn't find me. I ran home as fast as I could. The way up was more difficult, but I still climbed up the pipe to the window, opened the window, and froze on the sill. My parents were standing in the room. Mom had a little vein popping out of her forehead, and Dad just stared at me in silence. The horror took my breath away. In an icy voice, Dad asked me where I had been. Haltingly, I told my parents about the clinic. Maybe I could leave the house now. But Mom hissed angrily that I didn't appreciate their concern at all. And since I didn't trust their degree, they wouldn't give me such freedom anymore. Then Dad pulled me into the room so that I fell painfully to the floor. He said I wouldn't leave the room now, please. No. But my parents didn't listen to me. They locked the door and went downstairs. In a panic, I pounded on the door and shouted, but no one answered. Had they gone mad? There was only one hope: to escape through the window. In a hurry, I began to pack my things. If only my parents would not return. After 15 minutes, everything was ready. Grabbing my backpack, I rushed to the window and suddenly I saw my dad below. He had a drill in his hand. It turned out that he was going to drill a wrought iron gate to the window. I burst into tears of despair. These were my parents. How could they do this to me? Completely exhausted, I stayed locked up until nightfall. I called Judy several times, but she wasn't available. What should I do? And then I suddenly heard my folks swearing in the lab below me. All I could make out was my name and something about the final experiment. What would they do to me? It was very hard to hear, but I had to find out. Then my eyes fell on the glass. Exactly. My hands trembled with excitement as I leaned the glass against the floor. It worked. Now I could hear every word my parents said. My father whispered ominously that they would finish the experiment today. Maybe we made a mistake when we cloned her. Came from below. What? My folks must have gone crazy. At that moment, Judy called, and I hurriedly told her everything. My parents were crazy and they wanted to do something to me. Judy was scared for me and immediately suggested that I run. Yes, but how do I get out? My folks locked me up. And then I remembered the fire escape hatch in the ceiling. Of course. As a child, I liked to climb out of it on the roof, but my parents boarded up the passage. What if I tried to break open it? Suddenly, my parents downstairs became suspiciously quiet. Did they hear me? I whispered to Judy to wait for me at the bus stop. Trying not to shake, I quietly pulled the bed to the center of the room and climbed on it. I strained as hard as I could to push the hatch open, but my parents' footsteps were already on the stairs. Heck, I grabbed a chair and began pounding furiously at the hatch. And so, with a desperate blow, I managed to break open it. But my parents burst into the room, their faces twisted in anger. God, they were going to kill me. Mom took a huge syringe from behind her back and rushed to me. I tried to fight back, but a second later, she injected me with some liquid. No. I'd woken up on the couch in the lab, but now, my hands were strapped down. Dad was smiling insanely at the monitor. Oh, please, let me go. But Mom was already approaching me with a scalpel. I tried desperately to escape. This was the end. Suddenly the door burst open, and the police rushed in. They tied up my parents and charged them with child abuse. Then I saw Judy behind the officer, looking flustered. It turned out that when I didn't show up, she got scared and called the police. Bursting into tears, I hugged my friend. Without her, I would have died. We were all taken to the station to take statements, and I still couldn't believe that my parents had done this to me. At the station, they told the cops that they had a daughter who died of an illness. The parents couldn't accept her loss and started working in the lab to find a way to get her back. And in the end, they were able to clone their daughter, and I was born her exact copy. I was numb with shock. Were they trying to tell me I was a clone? The parents continued. They wanted to share their discovery with the world, but they were waiting for me to come of age. It was a matter of scientific laws. A clone was considered viable when they turned 18. That's why they conducted their tests. To be sure of my health at this point, but the police did not believe my parents and sent them to a psychiatric treatment. I walked out of the station, not knowing what to think. Was I really a clone, or were my parents nuts? And then Judy came up to me. She put her hand on my shoulder and told me she didn't care who I was. Most importantly, I was her friend. And then she added that we could still escape and travel all over the world. I cried with joy. Dear Judy, she wanted to travel with me no matter what. Remembering my parents, I decided that I didn't want to be afraid of everything anymore. Now I was not someone's experiment, and I was responsible for my own fate. In the end, we collected all the savings and went to the ocean. I felt like my life started all over again. Yes, I still hadn't solved the mystery of my birth, but I was finally free. Did you like the video? Subscribe and like it. Support the channel. Thank you.